rather than taking on the entire issue of homelessness, trying to actually, that I think that's a barrier, a potential barrier, recognizing that any movement in this space to serve is in the plus column. And that figuring out what works well for your community and taking on just one little piece.
Welcome to Jesus in the Upper Left, where we're talking about gospel multiplication in the Pacific Northwest.
Hey, welcome to the Upper Left Show. We are excited to be here with you today. My name is Gabe Kolstad. I'm with Westside Community Church in Beaverton, Oregon, and I'm with my friend Tim Osborne. Hey, Tim, how's it going?
It's going great. Good to be with you again.
Yeah, likewise. You're repping Western Seminary and Missio Church. Did I get that right?
Wow, spot on.
Oh,
Excellent.
nice. All right, cool. And what sports team?
Oh gosh, I'm a Niners fan.
Okay.
I'll confess that now,
Right.
and yeah, wear that proudly. So
Yeah.
I know that doesn't go over well here in the Upper Left.
Yeah.
So I'm suffering for the Niners.
Point of contention for sure.
It is. Yeah, I lose
Right.
chips with that here.
Yeah. Well, if we mute you and take your video off, you'll know why.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Okay. And we have a guest here, Nicole Larson. We're so grateful to have you here from Together PDX. Thanks for coming, Nicole.
Thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to be here with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. And you do so much work in the city. We'd love to hear about it and how we can all get involved. So why don't you start out by just telling us a little bit about yourself and all the things about you. And we'd love to hear, today, learn from you on how we can make a bigger difference in the city.
Well, thank you. Well, a little background on me. I've lived in Portland now for 20 years, originally from Southern California. And I've been involved in social work and ministry, kind of a combination of those things over all of this time. My background is in social work. I have a master's in social work, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker. But I've also always engaged in ministry. And so moving up to Portland, I had done advocacy work in LA for a handful of years, in particular working with homelessness and hunger. And so upon moving here, I couldn't really engage in advocacy. I didn't know what was going on. And I became a therapist for youth who were experiencing homelessness in Portland for a handful of years downtown. And then I ended up working for a church for 6 years, shepherding and providing counseling support to people with low access to care who wanted to integrate their faith into their healing journey. And during that time, I went to Western, actually, and did the Master's in Biblical and Theological Studies cohort with Gary Breshears, for those of you that, know him. And then I ended up working as a city liaison at Imago Dei Church in Central City and did that for 3 years, kind of collaborating in the city and really trying to foster more collaboration in service, in particular to those experiencing homelessness, and bringing together leaders who were elected officials and nonprofit leaders, and then church and faith leaders together, in addition to voices of lived experience, to really come together around what it looked like to collaborate in that space. And I really loved that role. I loved, really kind of bringing those groups together because I've had my foot in each one of those groups, if that makes sense. And so now I work as a city liaison for Together PDX, which for those of you that know or don't know, Together PDX is a relational network of about 100 churches in the Tri-County area around Portland. So we have Multnomah County in Portland proper, and then Washington County and Clackamas County. And so we have churches in all those areas. And it's just volunteer participation, and so my role as a city liaison here is to really engage with the city of Portland in particular, but to hear from them what the needs are and ways that the faith community can partner in service to vulnerable populations in our city. So get to meet with pastors all over the city to really understand what their vision and their heart is for their community and what they're already doing, what they hope to be doing, and meet with elected officials and really understand what they're already doing and what their heart is, and kind of create a bridge and avenues for participation for the faith community.
That's super exciting. Just like for me, I always think of what you're saying and I'm thinking, is it getting easier or are there still challenges? We'll get to that, but I'm like in my mind going, what are the stats doing? Like, is it, are we skyrocketing on the number of churches that are jumping in to get involved, or is that not happening? And so anyways, I know we'll talk more, but we're really grateful to have you here, Nicole.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Nicole, you've used a word that we're a huge fan of, but collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
You and bridge, like you're a bridge between ministry leaders, elected officials, church resources, and city resources. Can you kind of speak to just kind of in your experience why working together is so important, just citywide right now?
I think that's multifaceted, from a faith perspective. I don't think that we're meant to always have our eyes inward. I think that, Jesus calls us outward really, really clearly. And he also calls us to have a heart and care for our neighbor and those who are vulnerable amongst us. So I think knowing that it's our heart, it's our values, it's what the Lord's called us into to step in and care for those amongst us who are suffering. But realizing we always are more effective when we do that together, when we link arms, and I also don't believe that, as churches, we're meant to operate in isolation either. So easy as a church or as a leader to feel that responsibility or like you're in it alone. But I think when we're facing something as huge as the issue of homelessness and something so multifaceted that's all over the place, it really requires kind of an all hands on deck approach. And I think it's easy to make presumptions about what's happening at the government level. But when you take the time to sit down with leaders, when you sit down with elected officials, when you really get to know them, their story, their heart, what they're trying to accomplish, their staff, you see the work happening day to day. It's actually very heartening a lot of the times. And then even creating opportunities for the county to come together with the city on something. And then how does the faith community in that area engage? And, what does it look like to bring all of those voices to the table together and not duplicate the same thing, but kind of take ownership of different pieces? Because I think it really does require participation from everybody to truly be effective and see a change.
I kind of hear a couple things as you say that. One is just maybe this is a confession, but as a longtime church leader, as you're explaining all of that, I immediately think like, oh my gosh, my calendar just got strung out. Like that's going to take so long. There's so many steps. And so a lot of times an individual church, or like you said, an individual leader will get inspired to do something and then want to do it like Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're saying is it takes relationship building and bridge building with so many other parties and leaders and elected officials. And that's really helpful to hear and maybe be reminded of. Maybe I've heard it before, but to hear it again.
Well, and I would say it doesn't always have to be a long, drawn out process either. I think that's the beauty of the fact I have this role is I'm spending that time really engaging and getting to know, for example, all the elected officials in other churches. So when I sit down with a church or church leader, and they start expressing their heart for their community, I pretty quickly can assess like it would be great for you to talk from Adam from the city, sit down with him about utilization of this space or this other church because they're doing exactly what you're describing and maybe you could partner together. So it's not needing to have so much time where you're trying to figure it all out yourself. It's just being able to potentially name how your heart is being stirred, how you feel like God's leading you, what it looks like maybe in your community now, and what resources you want to see utilized in your community. And then I can really help make those connections to make the process as easy and as supportive as possible.
So that's super encouraging to hear. That's really good news. Can you kind of tell us some of the maybe the open doors that you're most excited right now, or that are the newest? And then also, like, what kind of momentum are you seeing with those opportunities? And maybe if you've got some stories that come to mind as you think about that.
Sure. Yeah. So over the summer, a group of pastors sat down with the mayor of Portland, Keith Wilson, and I would say there were maybe 50 pastors in the room and the mayor and his team. And really the desire to do that was to ask the mayor, what does it look like for the faith community in this moment to step in and serve and be supportive of what your main mission is right now? And so the mayor's whole focus at the time in the summer was really on ending unsheltered homelessness. And so he had a 6-point plan that he then described around what it looked like for the city to be doing that work. And I spent some time going deeper after that meeting to really understand from all of his team what the felt needs are. I'm very passionate that when it comes to responding to needs, that they be felt needs, because it's always easy to assume what people need, but it's more helpful, I think, when we ask and, really identify that. So then a desire to translate those needs into pathways toward engagement for church communities. So, I really believe that everybody can do something, and in creating opportunities that anybody could participate in. And so we looked at kind of 3 different levels, I guess, of engagement. The first level was around experience, where you would just start to maybe have an experience with unhoused neighbors or the idea of them. And so one huge need is supplies for the shelters in Portland. There are several shelters, and they're just seeing unprecedented numbers of people showing up at these shelters in need of so many things. And so I have a list of items that the shelters have requested that the city has sent over. I was just meeting this morning with a city representative who was saying, gosh, we really need socks at all the shelters. We really need hardy boots, work type boots that are water resistant. That's helpful for men and for women with a lot of the jobs that they're trying to get. We need diapers. They've been having more and more homeless families actually showing up, which is obviously so tragic. And, there haven't historically been enough shelters for families. So sometimes in these emergency situations, they're showing up at, congregate shelters that are for adults, and they're working on creating more shelter spaces, but they need diapers, they need formula, they need, all kinds of supplies, water bottles, granola bars, and first aid stuff and small toiletry things. That's one thing about the toiletries. When people say, oh, I'm going to donate a bunch of shampoo, they can't use big bottles. They need little ones. They don't want a pack of 10 toothbrushes that they have to open up because they don't stay hygienic. So having just one, toothbrush. And then I've also talked to shelter providers who say that's not what we need, because people, some people have dental issues where they don't need toothbrushes as much as they need mouthwash, but it can't have alcohol in it. So there's lots of nuance sometimes to just, once you hear it though, or you get your list, you're like, oh, that makes so much sense. Okay. So right now, especially with winter upon us, there are a lot of needs for supplies. And so that's a huge ask. Certainly there's a need for prayer teams that want to come together in prayer for our city, that want to come together in prayer for those experiencing homelessness and who are vulnerable amongst us. I am really passionate about prayer and believe that should inform any of our mission, any of what we're doing. And so that's a huge piece. And anybody at a church that wants to start a prayer group specifically around this would be just so valuable. And, Prayer PDX, which is underneath one of the umbrellas of Together PDX, hosts regular prayer in a space in Old Town too, in the garden space down there. So that's a neat way to jump in and participate. They're often praying, over the city, over vulnerable neighbors. So, and then kind of the next category is participation maybe in one-time volunteer opportunities. So sometimes there's a big, service project where a nonprofit might say, we really need beautification of our space where our residents are spending time. We have a painting project, or we could, plant some beautiful flowers outside, or, help make this space more homey and honoring to the people that are participating in the program. It could be going down to night strike, under the bridge. That city team, organizes that effort. There's also a new initiative called We All Have a Name that a friend of mine, Lance, he runs city team. He and a guy named Ryan Buchanan, they've co-started this effort where it's just an outreach that happens 3 times a week downtown in Old Town for about an hour. You go out in like a team of 4 with a little kit that contains like basic supplies, little hygiene kit, water bottle, granola bar, some socks, and just get to know someone's name that's on the street. And the impetus behind that was just, honestly, Lance tells a story of every day, going into his office there and climbing over somebody in the door, or, just this guy would never move, and he would get grumpy and frustrated that he had to deal with this guy every day, until one day kind of got down on his knee and just said, let me meet you, and he meets this guy, Josh, and just the humanization that can happen when you take the time to just know one person's name, and recognize that everybody that's there has a story, a history, just their own whole little world going on. And so taking the time to just meet them, give them some basic supplies, and then, there's some different resources that are available to them down there. And so being able to refer them to like a day center that's open at that time to go get a cup of coffee and some breakfast and some case management support. Or, are you connected to a shelter, or just that kind of thing. And so you would do that in a team of about 4 people, and they give you information so that you're not doing that blindly. Like, the first time I did it actually was for the pilot. And I thought, people used to come to me. I didn't go out on the street to them. I don't know what the best practice is. Like, do I knock on the tent? Like, I don't want to bug anybody, I don't know. So I chose to go with a guy who does outreach every day, because I thought, I'm gonna see what he's up to out here,
Lead.
Yeah, and it was great. The mayor actually came and he joined us on that pilot outreach that morning in Old Town.
I think he had. I was at that meeting in the summer with the pastors, and were you there? Were you in the room, Nicole?
I was actually. That's when they created this particular job.
That's what I remember. I couldn't remember if you were there or not, because somebody said like, "Oh, I know who would be great at this." I can't remember if they pointed to you or was going to be an email to you. So yeah, you got your job in that meeting.
Yeah.
But he had the mayor had Lance share that story.
Yeah.
With everyone in that meeting, and it was so inspiring and so like humanizing, like you said, and in some senses just like duh. Like everyone is like, just meet somebody. What's your name? It's the easiest. It's not the easiest. It's a natural first step that we often don't think of. But it felt really empowering. Like everybody can do this. You can come, and like you said, you went to the pilot, but to be uncomfortable doing that, but to follow somebody and go, oh, I can do this. I can watch you do it once, and then I can do it. And
Yeah, and I wasn't sure what to expect, with fentanyl and all the things that are going on the streets. Like, am I going to feel safe? How is it going to feel out there? And I felt perfectly safe, perfectly fine. If you see somebody who's actively using, that's not who you're going up to right then. You're just choosing anybody who wants to engage in some way and just having a brief, conversation with them that's hopefully humanizing and supportive. And that's that, So there's a lot of opportunities like that. There's plenty of nonprofits as well that, regularly have opportunities for people to engage, county as well. And so for people that want to organize kind of a big one-time event or just volunteer on occasion when they can. There's those opportunities. And then kind of that final tier is looking at like longer term engagement in this space and going deeper and for more time. And so the mayor at the time was asking churches, if they were in the Portland area, to consider becoming an overnight shelter, which is a very big ask. But the church would not be the one providing the shelter care and staffing. The church is providing building space, and then the city provides a shelter operator that comes in and runs that night shelter. So they'll use mats and temporary items for sleeping so that it can be cleaned up and everything can be utilized in the morning for the whole building space. And churches could receive payment from the city for utilizing their space. So, it can be a unique opportunity for, people who are church planting and maybe have like a building but don't have as many members yet, and they could benefit, financially from doing that, but then also having their building space used in such a beautiful way in service to those who are vulnerable in our city and in partnership with the city is fantastic. So we've had a few that have moved that direction. The mayor was passionate about having musicians volunteer in the shelters to play music. So not a big band really, but something a little bit more subtle, But again, when we talk about humanization, to realize these are human beings that are in these shelters, and we all benefit from music and what it can do to even just calm or inspire us. And so that's been beautiful. So people who have some musical talent that want to share that and never thought that that was going to be a way that they could support unhoused neighbors. There you go. There's a way to do that.
Yeah.
There's also a team that does reunification. It's a small team at the city, but, as people have been meeting with individuals on the street, finding out if they have any family or close friends that they've lost connection with, they might want to reunite with. And they've had actually great success finding people who I don't think my mom wants to talk to me anymore, but they reach out, and then it's like the mom's like, I would do anything to have them back, and I've been looking for them, and please. And so they can get them situated to get back on a plane ticket or a bus, or not that they're trying to just remove them by any means. They're just trying to help meet people where they're at. And if they have a viable relationship that could be supportive in them stabilizing, then they help make that connection and remove barriers like the finance of getting a plane ticket or whatever that is.
Which is pretty phenomenal. Like that's, I mean, I get it. You can easily go to, well, is that my tax dollars at work, and go down that road, which is fair. But I was like, that makes you, because he talked about some of the statistics of what reunification to be successful of staying out of addiction and off the streets, and to think about a bus ticket or a plane ticket to reunite with a family system that will be supportive was so. And then some of the stories that come out of that, of just the, like you said, the shock of the expectation of my family doesn't want me anymore, to no, that's actually not true, and put them on the phone together and hear otherwise, and then on a whole new path was wonderful to hear.
Yeah. I think it speaks to really understanding that there's a continuum of care that's involved, with any of these agencies, with the government, with churches. There's a need to really be able to meet people where they're at. And I think it's easy sometimes to think there's one solution to homelessness, and recognizing that there's a huge variation amongst each person who's coming in and experiencing homelessness. And so, even if I think back to my days working as a clinical case manager and counselor for youth experiencing homelessness, I might have a person who was just a college student who couldn't pay rent that month and ended up homeless. And they could be fast tracked into something like transitional housing where they could stabilize and hopefully bypass any kind of addiction or long prolonged instability that way. But you might have another person who's been homeless for 3 years already or 4 years already, suffers from severe and persistent mental illness, or suffers from, one of the drug use disorders. And their stabilization is going to look different. Being able to have a low barrier shelter to start out at and really work their way till they're ready to get in and receive treatment for their addiction, or get in and get some, clinical support for their mental health, or, whatever is needed to help them stabilize. It can just take longer or look different based on how a person is showing up, what their story is, what their needs are. And so also recognizing that how we respond well to those who are experiencing homelessness is an ability to have a complex and multifaceted continuum of care that can meet people where they're at. So if you have a person where they do have these viable connections in another state or whatever, that is one way of meeting that person where they're at to help them have the most support around them so that they can stabilize. And for somebody who doesn't have those connections, then you're exploring what services are available to them here. But just recognizing, it's great to actually have a lot of options because it better helps meet people where they're at.
Yeah, I got to jump in and say I'm so blown away by this conversation because of a couple of things. But one is that you just used the words complex and multifaceted, which is exactly what I'm like. When I think of this, I think, oh my gosh, it's so big, it's so layered, it seems impossible to move the needle with this one. And indeed, it's been proven to be a giant challenge, even when a city does go, really hard at it. So I think maybe I'm thinking right now about barriers. What keeps churches and leaders from connecting right now? Or is that, you could share more. But the other piece that I really feel, well, and that highlights why it's going to take all of us, I think, is what I meant to say. It's like if it's complex and multifaceted, that means, to your point, you're doing some of the heavy lifting, others are doing some of the heavy lifting, and some of the onboarding opportunities are pretty simple, and they're a piece of the puzzle, right? So nobody's being expected to jump in and figure this out, but just to participate, right? The other thing that I loved was hearing several examples of how you personalize this, and for one, you said in the beginning, Nicole. You can have a certain perspective about this issue until you sit down with somebody who's in the middle of it, one of the elected officials, and you're just hearing. And I love that approach of going, let's not just stare at this from a distance and judge the issue from a distance. How do we sit down with somebody and understand the issue? That was cool. Followed by the idea of learning the name of somebody who's homeless, rather than just taking a more impersonal approach to solving it, and several other things like the music thing. What a brilliant idea to go, what would I want, in my life if I hadn't had it for a long time? Oh yeah, live music. Wouldn't that be wonderful? To remind me that I'm a human being and that, that there's a good God that loves me. Those are just great things. So thank you for sharing that perspective on this. I really think it deepens my own understanding of how even me, who I live in the suburbs, yes, we still deal with homelessness at a different level, but it reminds me not to distance myself from what's actually going on. So thank you for sharing that. And the other thing I want to know, and maybe you could respond to, is what barriers are in the way of maybe all of us rolling our sleeves up? What do you see? And is there a way we could start to dismantle some of those barriers?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that you spoke to some of them just in your description, right? I think it's always tempting for any of us to be an armchair critic, to see something happening out there, not like it, and just assume we know everything that's going on. And, I remember when I started work, working with youth who are homeless, and my husband like, well, can't they just all get a job? Can't they just all, they're young, can't they all just go, work and immediately do stuff? And it's like, no, if you knew their story, if you knew the like horrific abuse that this person encountered starting at birth, what they've already lived through to be this incredible survivor, frankly, at, age 16, and putting one foot in front of the other, it's just a journey for people, and they have navigated so many different things. And even just being homeless in the first place is a traumatic event. So, I think whether it is our assumptions that we have about government, or it's our assumptions that we have about the homeless population, our assumptions can be a barrier, because they could really be off base and prevent us from stepping forward. I think another barrier that you kind of spoke to is how overwhelming the issue is, and how complex and multifaceted it is, that it's normal that we feel that overwhelm. I think we live in a day and age where overwhelm is just kind of constant, because we are bombarded with news. We are bombarded with media 24/7, showing us every problem that exists on the globe 24/7, and our nervous systems just cannot take it. We're just taking in all of these problems, but have this sort of helpless feeling like, I can't do anything myself about Gaza, and I don't know what to do about, Russia and Ukraine, and people are starving, and it's overwhelming. And I think that rather than taking on the entire issue of homelessness, trying to actually, that I think that's a barrier, a potential barrier, recognizing that any movement in this space to serve is in the plus column, and that figuring out what works well for your community and taking on just one little piece. You don't have to do everything, but what is one little piece that your community can do to step in, and what feels like a fit? And my ask too has been to church leaders, because as much as we could reach out to the individual person in every congregation, I think it's a miss, because we have the opportunity as church leaders to really seek the Lord, to really pray and discern, how is God calling our community to serve in this time? What does that look like? And to remain open to how God might lead. And I think that there's something every community can do. But if we think we have to do everything and every part of it, and develop all the relationships and know all the city people and talk to all these other churches when we're trying to support our church community itself, of course it's going to feel overwhelming. So I think just realizing sometimes that overwhelm can be a barrier, and how do we make it really bite-sized and really something that's a really good fit for each community, and recognize the cumulative impact of everybody saying yes in some way is what adds up to that giant impact. So yeah, I would say those are probably a few barriers that I would see.
Great. Yeah.
Nicole, if you were to maybe think on two different levels, and you've listed a ton of ways to serve and to connect and to get involved. But if you could speak to church leaders and say, here are a few next steps or opportunities, and then speak to anyone who's following Jesus that wants to get involved, and what are some specific opportunities and ways they could connect?
I think the simplest ask really is just to reach out to me. I'll make sure we provide my email address, but really, I want to take the time to hear your heart as a church leader, hear about, a lot of churches have already engaged in some capacity to care for people experiencing homelessness. So to really hear if that's the case, what you've already been doing, what your community of faith really seems to, what resonates with them, what they might have a passion for. And then I love making connections with people at the city or the county or nonprofit leaders that I think really would align with what that vision is. And it's okay if you don't already know what that is. If you're also at a place where you're like, I don't know, but I'm open, then we start there. And I can really kind of bring lots of opportunities, and then you can take time as a faith leader to really, pray over those and think about those and ask, the people in your community have maybe been doing something in that space or who you think might have a heart for it, for their feedback and their level of interest, and just kind of start surveying the scene. But that next step as a church leader really is, if they're open to it, meeting with me. I'll come to your church and sit down and we can just talk about it and start the conversation. I sat down with a pastor yesterday who is really trying to discern this next season of service for their faith community. And so we had that conversation around kind of, here's the different opportunities. And the next step is going to be, they really want to meet with city leaders to explore what the city is saying. These are real felt needs right now. And then this church leader can say, this pastor can say, well, we have, these resources here within our community. We have this sort of side building that we're not really using, that what can we dream up? What could that space potentially be used for? And would that be a fit for our community? Or, we have this little group within our church who's been doing this, and, how could we fan a flame to see if they want to do something else or in addition to? So it really can look like that.
Well, I love that. And if I can just say, thank you. It's such a better invite, and it involves so much more on your end, obviously, than here, let me rattle off the three things, which is great and that's helpful. But for you to actually be willing to sit down and really help discern and diagnose and consult, and that's huge for a church leader, to not just be handed a list of things to choose from, but to find a match to what's God doing in our specific church community, faith community, and what's a need. And so for you to be able to see both sides of that, and as you said earlier, a bridge that connect that is really, that's fantastic.
That's a gift.
So
thanks. Yeah, my heart is just to really be in support to pastors and leaders that are in this space, so that they're not feeling like they've got to do it all on their own or execute this, or I don't know, come up with everything. So, and then to your question around what to do if you're an individual, not, working in vocational ministry, but you're an individual who hears this and you're part of a church and you want to engage, I think my ask would be to reach out to one of your church leaders, and together, let's set up a meeting. Because the fact that it's stirring your heart, my guess is God wants to use you in some beautiful way in that community, and to step into some leadership capacity in service to those experiencing homelessness. So what is that looking like in your life and the way that God's moving in you? But that you don't have to walk alone, that you would have the support of your church. And hopefully your church could then, as you, dream with that pastor and you pray together and you really figure out like what's a fit for the broader community too, and how do we invite others into this? So I would say grab one of your, one of your pastors and encourage them to participate in a meeting too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and there's so many, as you're saying that, I'm just realizing I've come across so many stories of individuals or small groups or missional communities that are a part of a church that they've on their own come up with something that they're doing.
Yeah.
And so just what you just described is an invitation to widen that and empower what they're already doing, and to find a connection and invite others in, which is huge. That's
and
great.
I think it's more sustainable. It wouldn't be hard for me to just put QR codes on a website and say, go sign up to do this thing. But the reason I'm not doing that is because I think really the hope would be this is for the long arc, and so and I think we benefit when we serve together. Like if we're participating in service in our community of faith, in our church, amongst other people that are part of our church, that's a really bonding, connecting experience. It fosters deeper community. It stretches us in our own faith to be in service a lot of times. And to be able to share that experience is a beautiful thing. Sometimes ministry in a space with people who are really vulnerable can be very hard. There can be secondary trauma just walking alongside somebody who's sharing all of their trauma. I don't know. I think having other people so you're not doing that alone really helps make it more sustainable too, and can deepen your church and the connections within your church. So I think that having the church's support behind you to really make sure that you're cared for too, because leaders all need care as well.
I think it's also a great expression of unity, and that being something that we know is gonna be the greatest witness possible to our city is just the unity of the body of Christ, which I think you guys both been here for a long time. I remember the last time we were in a season like this where there was favor with the city, and the things that God did. And it does seems to me like we're right back there at this place of opportunity and favor and, coming in with a towel, right. To be that servant. But if we do it together, man, I just feel like the impact, like you said, Nicole, this is going to go on for a long time. This is not just let's flip a switch and fix a problem and move on with our lives, but this is about integrating with the city in a way where the gospel gets to stay around for a long time.
Totally.
It feels like a great season.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. I really do feel a unique favor and a unique invitation for our churches, for the people of Jesus to really respond and be a reflection of his love to our city and to our leaders and just kind of to everybody we're encountering in this space. It's a really unique witness to actually live out our faith with humility and in service to those who are suffering around us. And, there have been these unique windows, I think, historically in Portland, whether it was around foster care. We had, partners with Embrace Oregon and, the welcome boxes that were done. And that's still, happening, where there's really beautiful partnership between government and the faith community in that area, or, refugee resettlement when, the Refugee Care Collective was launched when a bunch of churches came together, and it's now a nonprofit, but families who were coming and resettling here were matched up with people who wanted to volunteer and just kind of journey alongside them as they resettled and just got to be their friend. Our family did that, and I'm still very, very, very close friends with that family. But I think this is unique that the mayor, for example, would ask for help from churches, and I think especially in this time where, government funding is really, really dramatically downscaling, especially federally, a lot of nonprofits are struggling. The government's budgets are slashed. And so where maybe they had resource to accomplish certain things, they have limited resource. And it really is like the church has a unique window to step up and be the church in a time like this. And I think God is just doing something really beautiful. And that's the way that I view it, as an invitation. I really do. Because anytime that we get to participate in something that God is doing, it is a blessing to us, It's a beautiful opportunity. And so I think, I don't know, I'm always trying to hang on to that anticipatory mindset, I guess, of like, what is God doing? And really trying to pray into that space. And, it's easy to just assume we know the answers too, but recognizing God's doing a new thing. And what is that in this season? And what is our part in that? It's pretty exciting, actually.
It is. It is.
It is.
Thanks so much for sharing it with us and for inviting us into this opportunity. So it's Nicole at togetherpdx.org. Is that right?
Yes.
So everybody-
NICOLE at togetherpdx.org.
All right. Everybody email Nicole, right?
Yeah. Feel free, honestly.
That's great.
So cool. And we look forward to getting involved and seeing what happens.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Jesus in the Upper Left. We want to ask you a quick favor. Would you please subscribe so you don't miss a single episode, and share with those that are in your life that might benefit from the content. Hit the notifications button, rate and review, of course, and then head on over to upperleftshow.com where you can find bonus content, opportunities to connect with those around the city that are doing similar work as you, resources to help you, and just a way to connect to the community. We hope to see you again next time.